Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the absolute toughest and honestly most fiercely debated questions in all of social science: demographic stratification. Why do some populations just seem to fall behind others over time? To really get to the bottom of this, we're going to look through the lens of a really fascinating behavioral model. It's called the Productive Value Productive Power Framework, or just PVPP for short. Let's get right into it. So, when we ask why some groups fall behind, you've probably noticed that the conversation almost always falls straight into a highly charged blame trap, right? Some folks will immediately point to things like culture or family structure. Others point to discrimination, policy failures, or just the cold mechanics of free markets. And hey, while each of those might capture a piece of the puzzle, none of them really describes the underlying mechanisms, like how disadvantage actually compounds on a structural level. But today, I promise you a completely different approach to looking at this. To pull this off, we're going to completely remove the emotional narrative. We are absolutely not looking for someone to blame here. Instead, we're going to look strictly at the structural mechanics of human development. Think of it this way. In clinical and economic settings, this PVPP framework is used to bypass all that emotional weight of a crisis and just map out the underlying physics of survival and capability. And that is exactly what we're going to do here. Physics, not narrative. Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll start by defining power and value. Then we'll explain interaction corridors. After that, we'll map out the time linear chain, look at the compounding loop, and finally wrap up with artificial PP insertion. All right, part one, defining power and value. Okay, to really dive in, we need to nail down two foundational concepts. The first one is productive value, or PV. Think of this as the transaction itself. It's the actual transfer that happens between agents during an interaction. It's literally what moves between people. Now, sure, this could be a physical good, a service, or money. But it also includes things like a mentor giving you some really useful advice, right? Or a parent providing safety and care, or a teacher giving instruction. Honestly, even things like a warning, a showing of trust, or a bit of discipline, those are all forms of productive value moving from one person to another. Now, the second concept is productive power, or PP. If PV is the transaction, kind of like a software update you download, then PP is the capacity. It's the upgraded hardware that actually remains inside the agent after that interaction is totally over. It's the stuff that allows a person to actually do, tolerate, access, or recover from things in the future. So for a child, productive power includes their vocabulary, their ability to regulate emotions, their bodily health, and even their basic trust in institutions. It is the capacity that's actively being formed. Let's move on to Section 2, Interaction Corridors Explained. So because productive power doesn't just sit in a vacuum, it fundamentally dictates how you interact with society. And that brings us to this idea of the interaction corridor. An interaction corridor is basically the structured range of possible exchanges available to you. The absolute key insight here is that people don't just have different amounts of money or resources. They actually face entirely different sets of doors and pathways. Your corridor dictates who is going to transact with you, on what terms, with what level of trust, and crucially, this is huge, what your recovery options are if you make a mistake. You can really see the stark difference in the environments here. A high-quality corridor offers you a safety net, right? Better information, strong mentors, reliable institutions, and highly recoverable mistakes. If you fail, the net catches you. But a low-quality corridor? That's a trap. It's full of predatory offers, weak information, lower trust counterparties, and just incredibly harsh consequences. A single mistake here can literally mean falling through the cracks entirely. Which leads us to Section 3, the time linear chain. To really grasp demographic divergence, we have to map these concepts out chronologically over a human lifespan. Because, let's face it, a child isn't born into the market as some fully formed economic agent. An adult doesn't just poof into the labor market out of thin air. They enter it after years and years of sequential corridor formation, passing through early childhood, school age, adolescence, and finally early adulthood. This framework shows us exactly how the corridor you exit in one stage strictly dictates the corridor you enter in the very next stage. It's like an unbreakable chain. Look at early childhood. Inputs like health, safety, and language exposure form a child's basic productive power. That initial PP totally dictates their school readiness. Then school readiness sorts that child into stronger or weaker learning and behavioral corridors. Those school corridors shape their adolescent peer groups, their credentials, their risk exposure. By the time that person reaches early adulthood, their initial market entry position, their job access, their credit, their professional networks, it's already been heavily shaped by a decade and a half of sequential corridor formation. Moving right along into Section 4, the compounding loop. So, how does this time linear chain actually feed back into itself? Well, let's look at the actual mechanics of disadvantage here. Step 1. Low early productive power means the agent lacks critical capabilities right out of the gate. Step 2, this lack of capability automatically routes the agent into weaker, lower quality interaction corridors. Step 3, inside those weak corridors, the agent receives lower quality productive value transfers. We're talking poorer instruction, less reliable information, less safety. And step 4, those weak transfers directly result in a reduced formation of future productive power. And then, the loop just repeats. This right here is a mechanical engine of cumulative disadvantage, and it is completely separate from any sort of moral failings. And honestly, this is a massive paradigm shift. It means that corridor degradation actually precedes choice. Yes, individual agency exists, for sure. People absolutely make choices. But we have to remember they are making those choices inside a corridor set that was already constrained by prior productive power conditions. If your corridor only offers predatory credit terms and super fragile recovery paths, your choices are fundamentally different than someone navigating a high-quality corridor. The available interactions are just simply not equal. And finally, Section 5, artificial PP insertion. Okay, so if this is just a process of physics, how on earth do we stop this compounding loop of disadvantage? Well, the answer lies in something called artificial PP insertion. Now, artificial doesn't mean it's fake. It simply means society is manually inserting capability into the agent before their corridor narrows permanently. If a child receives strong productive power early on, outside of their natural compounding loop, they can actually be shifted into a completely higher quality corridor class. It's a total trajectory changer. In the real world, this looks like nutrition and health programs. And notice, these aren't just charity. Structurally speaking, they protect physical and cognitive PP formation. Things like early literacy and numeracy programs. They artificially insert the capability required to blast open later educational corridors. Safety and stability interventions physically reduce the erosion of PP caused by trauma and unpredictability. And mentoring, that transfers behavioral, institutional, and strategic PP directly to the agent. These interventions mechanically alter future corridor access. Now, I want you to notice the visual on the screen here. It represents a strict boundary. The PVP framework explicitly reminds us that it models consequences, not moral commands. The framework doesn't sit there and say, society must intervene. It doesn't contain some built-in rule about fairness. It merely models the physics of what happens if we do and exactly what happens if we don't. To summarize this objective boundary perfectly, the source text actually notes, and I quote, "A society can decide to let weak agents be pruned, or it can decide to insert PP and alter the path." The framework describes both. Think about that. If agents are just left to compete with totally unequal power, the system will naturally sort, stratify, and prune the weak. Human society is unique, though, because it can actually choose to interrupt that natural process. And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this explainer. Interaction corridor quality is the missing middle layer between where a person starts and where they ultimately end up. By understanding this mechanical, compounding loop, we can strip away all the blame, and we're left with a very simple structural choice. Will we let compounding mechanisms just run their course, or will we step in and alter the path? The physics are crystal clear. The choice of what to do with them, however, well, that's entirely up to us. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time.